Take the deadliest men are never the loudest. They're the ones who've already decided what they'll do if pushed. Let us know in the comment section below, what would you do if you found out your neighbor wasn't who he claimed to be? The axe handle was old, not in a cracked or fragile way, but seasoned, like the hands that gripped it. Caleb Hunter worked the grindstone quietly, eyes narrowed against the morning sun that sliced through the trees. The rhythmic whir of the blade sharpening against the stone could have been soothing, if not for the look in his eyes. Focused, controlled, like a man used to fine edges. He didn't sharpen tools for sport. Everything he did served a purpose. That was just how the world worked when you'd spent 2 decades learning to live on the edge of life and death. Camping behind him looked quaint. Log walls, a rocking chair, the smell of cedar oil and pine sap, a place where no one would expect trouble, let alone expect that the very soil around it had been turned, mapped, and calibrated as a real-world special forces training ground. No one had ever broken in. Not yet. Most folks around here didn't even know he existed. Caleb paused and looked down at Duke. The aging Belgian Malinois sat alert at his side, ears twitching, gaze fixed on the tree line. Something's off, Caleb said, more to himself than the dog. Duke didn't bark, didn't growl. He simply rose slowly to his feet and stared into the trees. And miles south, a very different sort of quiet was breaking. "Yo, Trigger, you see this place?" Alonzo Zip Perez spit sunflower seeds out the open van window as they cruised the gravel path. "Looks like some old hermit lives here. Probably got a shotgun, a beard down to his crotch, and a couple jars of pickled toes in the basement." Trigger, who'd long stopped finding Zip funny, didn't respond. He was studying the satellite image printed out on the dash clipboard. Black and white, grainy, but the shape of the cabin was clear. More importantly, the notes scribbled across the margins, taken from months of rural rumor and internet sleuthing, said one thing: isolated and unguarded, which, in his experience, usually meant unclaimed opportunity. Or it meant someone wanted you to think that. "Yo," said Brick, the third man in the van and the only one who actually kept a pistol on his lap instead of in his duffel. "Are we hitting this place or not?" Trigger scratched the stubble on his jaw and exhaled through his nose. "We hit it, but stay sharp. Old dudes out in the woods, they ain't stupid. They're either crazy or ex-military." Zip chuckled. "You always say that, bro. Nobody's Rambo out here. Most of these guys are just broke and weird. Bet he's got a shed full of canned beans and nudie mags from 1987. Trigger didn't laugh. He slid a black duffel to his feet, unzipped it, and checked the contents. Bolt cutters, a pry bar, Glock, 2 M80s. Zip raised an eyebrow. "You expecting war?" Trigger finally cracked a smile. Small, crooked. "I always expect war." They reached the ridgeline that curved around the last part of the trail. From here, the cabin was 100 yards ahead and mostly hidden. No mailbox, no lights, no vehicle. Only the gentle curl of chimney smoke. That meant someone was home. Duke shifted first, pacing the edge of the porch. Caleb followed behind him, methodical, slow, placing each step like it was memory, not motion. His fingers slipped instinctively to the old switch under the porch rail, a panel that controlled the triggers for 3 buried pressure plates and 2 wildlife cams. He didn't live in paranoia. He lived in preparation. Inside the cabin, Caleb stepped over to the rifle case mounted vertically beside the pantry. He unlatched it and pulled out an M14, cleaned, oiled, loaded. Nothing fancy, just reliable. He didn't think he'd need it. Not yet. But something about the way Duke's hackles were rising made him respect the instinct. The gang didn't come at the cabin loud. That was unusual. Normally, guys like them roared in, confident and dumb. But these 3 parked 100 feet back, approached on foot, 2 up front, and 1 circling the back. They weren't amateurs. Caleb watched them through a peephole drilled so finely into the wall grain that only someone who built the place would know it existed. The one in front, tall, scar across his lip, black hoodie, was in charge. His movements were too clean for street gang flailing. Former corrections? Maybe army? Caleb filed that away. The second guy, lean, twitchy, overcompensated confidence. Junky nerves. The third one, walking wide around the structure, silent, efficient. That was the real threat. Three-man staggered approach. This wasn't a robbery. It was a test. Caleb tapped Duke once, on the flank, a silent command. The dog trotted behind the cabin wall, disappearing into the trees. Outside, Trigger stopped cold. "You feel that?" he muttered. Brick came up beside him. "Feel what?" Trigger looked toward the woods, eyes narrowing. "Like we're already inside something." Rick frowned. "You're talking weird again." "Shut up." Zip waved from the back porch. "Doors locked. Curtains are closed. Place smells like cedar," and a metallic click interrupted him. Caleb opened the front door. He didn't speak, just stood there. 6'2", flannel shirt, neutral face, not hostile, not friendly, just still. Behind him, the inside of the cabin revealed nothing. No weapons, no guards. Just shelves of books. A kettle steaming quietly on a wood stove. A man at home. Trigger's eyes flicked from Caleb's stance to his hands. Relaxed, but ready. No shake, no twitch, no obvious fear. "You the owner?" Trigger asked. Caleb answered with a question. "What are you looking for?" Zip stepped forward. "We were just hiking, got lost. Needed to borrow a phone." Caleb stared at him. "Nobody hikes in this part of the woods without a reason." Trigger stepped in. "Look, we don't want trouble. Just need a place to rest. Maybe a phone. You help us out, we'll be gone by morning." Caleb didn't blink. "You won't make it to morning if you try anything stupid." The silence dropped like a hammer. Rick reached toward his belt, but froze when Caleb raised his left hand. Not a gun, just his hand. Trigger's mind raced. The gesture. It wasn't empty. It was a code. Military? Special forces? He couldn't tell. Behind him, the woods rustled. Not squirrels, not birds. Movement, deliberate, wide space. Then, a low growl. Not from a pet, but from a predator. Valentine Trigger took a step back. "Guys," Caleb's voice was quiet. "Last chance." Zip hesitated. "He bluffin', right?" Trigger couldn't answer, because deep in his gut he knew. This wasn't a cabin, as a perimeter, and they'd already stepped too far inside it. Zip's grin was thinning fast. Caleb hadn't moved since giving that last warning. No shift in weight, no retreat, just stillness. A stance Zip couldn't read, and Trigger couldn't ignore. There was no bravado, no raised voice, no weapon drawn, and that was what made it worse. A man without fear was bad enough, but a man who knew what was about to happen and wasn't fazed by it? That was something else entirely. Trigger signaled subtly with 2 fingers at his side. Brick saw it, so did Zip. A move like that didn't come from movies. It came from experience. Fire teams, units, orders passed with hand signs in dark corners of bad places. Caleb didn't react, but his eyes, cold and precise, followed that signal. He knew it too. The forest stirred again, low and deliberate. Trigger nodded toward the porch. "You mind if we step in?" "We won't stay long." Caleb stepped aside, holding the door. He didn't say yes, he just opened the path. Trigger stepped through first. Instinct told him it was safer to be inside the man's space than caught out in the open. Brick followed. Zip hesitated. That growl again, closer this time. He spun around. "Yo, what was that?" Caleb's voice came from behind him now. "That's Duke." Duke, like a dog? Like a war dog. Afghanistan. Ramadi. Fallujah. Trigger paused mid-step. Caleb let that hang in the air. Some people retire with medals, Caleb said, closing the cabin door behind them. Others retire with ghosts. Duke and I, we took the ghost with us. The three men stood awkwardly in the living room. Zip was the first to notice there were no family photos, no hunting trophies. Just a few framed maps, military books, and an oil portrait above the hearth. Two soldiers, camo-clad and dust-covered, one man and one dog, staring out from a Humvee. Not a staged photo, a real one, a memory captured mid-operation. Trigger's eyes scanned the room. There were tells, the precision of the stacked firewood, the boot rack by the door organized by terrain use, and the framed quote etched in wood over the kitchen entry. In the absence of orders, find something and kill it. It was a phrase Trigger knew from somewhere. Ranger battalions, maybe? Delta training? Brick paced toward the back window. The forest was still now, too still. "What's with all the gear?" Zip asked, voice a little too high. "Living off-grid takes work," Caleb replied. Zip scoffed. "You got generators? Solar? I don't see no power lines." Caleb tilted his head slightly, but didn't answer. Brick looked over his shoulder. "You live out here alone?" "For now." Trigger finally spoke up. "You military?" Caleb nodded once. "Retired." Trigger leaned back against the wall. "I was with the 160th SOAR, Night Stalkers." "That was new." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Army aviation?" "Blackhawks, gunships. Iraq, mostly. First couple tours we'd fly over guys like you. Spec ops stuff. Never saw faces, just green flares and heat signatures." Caleb's expression softened a degree. "You get out clean?" Trigger hesitated, then nodded. "Mostly." That word, homeless, hung like a ghost in the space between them. "Then you know what kind of place this is," Caleb said quietly. Zip looked confused. "What do you mean, what kind of place?" Trigger's jaw clenched. "This ain't a hunting cabin." "No," Caleb said. "It's not." Rick muttered, "Then what is it?" Caleb stared at them, one by one. "You're standing in a decommissioned Tier 1 training site, coordinates classified, used from 2006 to 2013 to prepare operatives for deep terrain combat, hostage recovery, and red cell infiltration." Brick laughed, nervous and dismissive. "Man, what the hell are you even saying?" Trigger didn't laugh, because he'd heard of places like this. Rumors, mostly. Tiny spec ops compounds disguised as civilian shelters. No paperwork, no oversight. Ghost sites for ghost missions. "How do you still have access?" Trigger asked. Caleb looked him in the eye. "Because I never gave it up." Zip looked between them. "Okay, I don't get it. Are we supposed to believe this place is rigged like some kind of Rambo Home Alone setup? What, you got claymores in the flower beds?" Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he picked up a remote off the mantel and pressed one button. Right. The windows suddenly dropped into darkness, not with curtains, but with armored shutters. Steel panels sliding from the inside of the walls, locking into place with magnetic seals. All light vanished. The room went pitch black. Then a soft red glow lit up the hallway. Emergency LEDs. Low level, military grade. Zip cursed and backed into a wall. "Okay, what the hell, man?" Rick reached for his weapon, but Caleb was already moving. He crossed the room in 3 steps and twisted Brick's wrist just enough to send the pistol clattering to the floor. Not with aggression, just force. Measured, controlled, precise. Trigger didn't move. His instincts screamed, "Not yet." Caleb turned to them again, now standing beside the fireplace. "I didn't invite you in," he said. "I gave you a chance." Zip's voice was breaking. "Yo, we didn't know, all right?" "We didn't know?" Caleb looked at Trigger. "But he did. Didn't you?" Trigger nodded slowly. "I had a feeling," he said. "Didn't know it was you, but yeah." I knew this wasn't just some woodshed hermit. And you came anyway? Trigger exhaled. I thought it was abandoned. No, you didn't, Caleb replied. You thought it was weak, and you're not the first. Trigger said nothing. Brick flexed his wrist. Furious, humiliated. Zip looked ready to bolt through a wall. Caleb walked to the front door and tapped twice on the wood. A moment later, Duke reappeared. Not from outside, but from a panel in the floor, a hatch that slid open near the fireplace. He padded silently into the room, tail still, eyes locked on the intruders. You brought trouble to a place built for war, Caleb said. This cabin doesn't just remember how to fight. It wants to. Rick backed toward the kitchen. Yo, this dude's nuts. He's living in some militia compound fantasy. No, Trigger said softly. He's not. Then what the hell are we doing here, man? Trigger looked at Caleb. You gonna kill us? Caleb shook his head. You're going to walk back out that door. No weapons, no lies, and you're going to forget this place ever existed. Rick snarled. Or what? Caleb stepped forward. Duke flanked him. Or the next time you walk into a cabin like this, he said, you'll only make it halfway through the door. Trigger raised his hands slowly. We're done here. Zip didn't argue. He was already heading for the van, sweat darkening his hoodie. Rick held Caleb's gaze for a moment longer, but he broke first. Always did. He followed the others into the dark. Caleb watched them vanish into the trees. Then he turned to Duke. They'll be back. Duke sat. Caleb reached for the old rotary phone mounted behind the cupboard wall. He didn't use it unless he had to. It didn't connect to a network. It connected to a line that ran directly through 2 relays and into a number few people on Earth still answered. He picked it up, dialed 3 digits, then waited. Yeah, came the voice on the other end. It's me. Protocol's been breached. Silence. In the reply. Understood. Standing by. Caleb hung up and walked back toward the grindstone. The axe still needed sharpening, and the night was just getting started. The van rolled down the narrow gravel path like a wounded animal trying to slink away from a predator that hadn't even bothered to chase it. Inside, the tension was thicker than the fog that clung to the rear windows. Trigger sat behind the wheel, jaw locked, his knuckles white around the steering wheel. Zip was in the passenger seat, fidgeting, eyes darting out the window as if expecting the trees to come alive and rip the van apart. Britt sat in the back, arms crossed, one leg bouncing with nervous energy. Nobody said a word for the first mile. Finally, Zip broke the silence. I don't know what the hell that was, man, but I ain't never going back out there. Trigger didn't answer. I mean, who lives like that? Zip continued. Steel shutters, a freaking war dog, and a trapdoor? You saw that dog, right? That thing didn't bark once, just looked at us, like it was deciding which part to rip off first. Rick scoffed. He didn't even flinch when you pulled your piece. I didn't pull it, Zip snapped. I had my hand near it. You twitched, and he nearly shattered your wrist. They said I didn't pull it? Enough, Trigger said, his voice cutting through their bickering like a razor. Just shut up. The van lurched as he swerved around a pothole. More trees. More silence. He knew, Brick muttered. He knew we weren't hikers the second he saw us. Of course he did, Trigger said. Guys like that, they don't see what's in front of them, they see what's underneath. He read our posture, our spacing, the timing of our approach. Hell, he probably even clocked our scent on the wind. You think someone like that just forgets how to fight? Zip was shaking his head. He said it was a training site, like government level. Do you think that's true? Trigger didn't respond, but the way he kept staring at the road like it might vanish beneath them told them everything they needed to know. Back at the cabin, Caleb was methodically rearming the perimeter. The forest around his home had once been rigged with over a dozen sensors and environmental tripwires, most of which had been removed after the site's decommissioning. But Caleb had never fully shut it down. Not because he was paranoid, because he understood the rhythms of men. When one group sniffed around, another always followed. The smart ones ran, the greedy ones came back. And the worst ones. They brought more friends. He moved through the underbrush without a sound, Duke weaving beside him like a shadow. Caleb reset the buried seismic sensors and reactivated the old perimeter alert grid. Modded with some of his own gear since the shutdown, he'd scavenged the tech over the years, keeping it ready, not because he wanted trouble, because the world eventually delivered trouble. As he buried the last sensor node and packed the dirt tight with a gloved hand, Duke's ears twitched. One sharp growl. Caleb turned, crouched low. Nothing in sight, but he didn't need to see it. Movement. Out past the ridge. He pressed a finger to a tiny device on his belt. A green light blinked. The cabin's backup system would now stream to a satellite relay overhead, bouncing live feed to a secure hardline Caleb had stashed in a ranger station 10 miles north. If anything happened to him, the data wouldn't die with him. The last time he'd used the line was 8 years ago, after a mission that never officially happened, after men like Trigger thought their silence made them safe. It never did. By nightfall, the forest had gone completely still. No crickets, no birds. Even the wind seemed to have pulled back. Inside the van, parked outside a run-down motel on the edge of town, Trigger was staring at a burner phone in his hand. The number had been scribbled on a torn receipt pulled from a book inside the cabin, The Art of War, dog-eared and dust-covered. He hadn't taken the book, just the number, scrawled inside the back cover in small, sharp writing. If you're calling this, you're not ready for what comes next. Trigger punched in the digits and hit call. It didn't ring. Not once. A voice answered on the first second. Calm, measured. You were warned. Trigger exhaled. I don't know who you are, but I need to talk to Hunter. Silence. Then, you already did, and you didn't listen. Wait, deadline. Rick paced the room like a caged animal. We got two options. We either leave town, or we go back heavy. Zip's eyes widened. Back? Back? Did you not see what just happened? That dude wasn't bluffing. That whole house is a trap. Trigger stood up slowly. Which is exactly why we don't let it go. You're insane, Zip muttered. You think this is about pride? He doesn't care about your ego, bro. He's not trying to prove anything, he's just waiting. That's the point, Trigger said. He's waiting, which means he expects us, which means he has reason to believe we will come back, and if he's that sure, then he's already set the board, Brick finished. Exactly, Trigger said. We're on it now, whether we like it or not. Across the county line, Sheriff Dean Rourke was sipping coffee at his desk when the first signal tripped. He didn't get the full feed, just a blink on a private radio receiver Caleb had given him years ago, with one rule: never ask questions, and only listen when the light flashes blue. Tonight it flashed blue. Rourke looked around the empty office, sighed, and muttered, "Son of a bitch." Back in the woods, Caleb knelt at the base of a tall cedar tree and unfolded a tarp. Inside was a weapon case the size of a coffin. He cracked it open. Inside lay more than guns. There were dossiers, photographs, flight manifests, maps with circled coordinates, all from an operation labeled Serpent's Cradle, an off-books takedown of a rogue smuggling network in 2011. Trigger's name had been on one of the manifests, not as an operator, as a witness, one who vanished before testimony. Caleb had never forgotten. Now, neither would Trigger. He closed the case and slung a duffel over his shoulder. Duke followed silently as they headed toward the eastern tree line, away from the cabin. There were some things you couldn't defend from the porch. Some things had to be finished in the dark. Trigger loaded fresh magazines into 2 rifles and stared at the motel mirror. What kind of man lives in the woods alone, surrounded by shadows and steel? A man who is alone at all is waiting for war to remember his name. The forest doesn't speak in words, but it remembers voices. Caleb moved like a whisper through the trees, his steps placed with care even the earth respected. Duke trotted ahead, pausing every 20 yards to scan the trail, nose twitching, ears angled like antennae tuned to frequencies only war dogs understand. Caleb's body moved by memory. Every path, every tree root, every rise in the terrain. It was muscle, not mind. This stretch of woods had once been a proving ground, and tonight it would be again. They reached the bluff overlooking the access road an hour after sunset. The dark was full now, no moon, cloud cover thick. But Caleb saw better in shadows than most men did in daylight. He knelt beside a rock outcrop and retrieved the small, motion-activated drone he'd placed there years ago. It wasn't fancy, just a modified quad with infrared capability and a tight-range signal bounce. Most wouldn't have thought to look for it. Fewer still could detect its signal. He powered it on, and it rose in silence, vanishing into the canopy. Below, in the valley, headlights cut through the dark. Trigger was coming back. In 2 vehicles. A blacked-out truck up front, a second SUV behind, matte green and dust-slick, military surplus by the look of it. Caleb tracked the speed, the intervals between brake taps. These weren't rookies. The driver of the lead truck knew the terrain, or at least knew how to respect it. He zoomed in on the cab. Finger, driver's side. Beside him, Brick. In the back seat, he counted 2 silhouettes, one bulkier than the other. The SUV had 3 more. 6 meant not 3. The gang had leveled up. Caleb lowered the drone feed and packed up. It was time. He moved downhill, angling past a dry creek bed where he'd buried a cache 10 years ago. When he reached it, he slid a gloved hand under the mossy stone and popped the release plate. A narrow steel case emerged from the earth. Inside, C4 charges, a shortwave comms jammer, and an old friend, an M40 rifle still wrapped in oiled cloth. He lifted it out with reverence, chambered it once, listened to the click. The world was different now, but some truths never changed. If they were coming to finish something, they needed to understand what they'd started. Trigger had his eyes on the ridge as they pulled up to the spot just beyond the cabin's view. "Kill the lights!" The truck powered down. So did the SUV behind them. "Stack up," he ordered. "No shouting. No slipping. We move silent. Fast. In. Out. Burn it if we have to." Zip looked up from the back seat, pale but determined. "What if he's gone?" "He's not gone," Trigger said. "Guys like that don't leave. They wait." They dismounted in coordinated fashion. Brick checked the perimeter with the new guys. 2 of them ex-military, paid mercs Trigger had pulled in from a contact in Eugene. One had the look of a man who'd guarded more than a few cash convoys in places where rules didn't apply. The other didn't speak at all. Trigger waved them forward. They approached the cabin from the southern angle this time, avoiding the exposed clearing they'd come through before. Flashlights were kept off. Night vision goggles clicked into place. They moved like a team now. Too little, too late. As they reached the edge of the tree line, the first warning came. Not a gunshot, not a shout, but the sound of a single deliberate click. Rick froze. What was that? They all stopped. Trigger held up a fist. Then Caleb's voice came through the trees, not from a speaker, but from somewhere close. "You're standing on a training mine." No one breathed. "Relax," Caleb said, his voice calm. "It's a dummy. But now you know how close you are to not walking out." They turned in circles, trying to pinpoint him. Rick raised his rifle. "Show yourself." Caleb stepped out from a shadow between 2 trees 15 feet away. Unarmed. No threat posture. You're standing. Duke materialized beside him like a summoned ghost. "You brought more," Kalen said. "Good. Makes it easier to send the message." Trigger kept his weapon lowered but firm. You're outnumbered 6-on-1. Caleb tilted his head slightly. Only 6? Don't play games. No games, just clarity. Zip hissed, Man, shoot him already. Caleb took one step forward, all 6 weapons raised, but he didn't stop. Trigger's breath caught, because the ground near Caleb's foot glowed faintly red. Not firelight, laser trip. Caleb saw Trigger's eyes catch it, then smiled. Go ahead, pull a trigger, see how many walk away. Nobody moved. Rick whispered, He's bluffing. No, Trigger said. He's not. Caleb finally stopped moving. I told you the first time. This place was designed for the worst people imaginable. But I didn't tell you what it was really used for. Want to know what they trained us to do here? Silence. We didn't learn how to protect. We learned how to disappear, how to erase. From the dark, a whirring sound. The drone, it dropped low over the group, blinking red. We hurricaned at it. Don't, Khaled warned. Rick fired. The drone exploded in a burst of sparks and smoke, not from the impact, but by design. It blinded them temporarily. Trigger cursed, falling to a knee. Zip yelped and stumbled. That was when the first charge went off. A directional blast, non-lethal, just concussive, but powerful enough to send 2 of the mercs flying backward into the brush. The screams vanished. Caleb didn't move. Trigger looked up, coughing. You? This is an ambush. No, Caleb said. This is a lesson. Rick rolled over, dirt smearing his face. What the hell do you want? I want you to remember what happens when men like you forget there are still lions out here, Caleb said. I want you to remember that not everyone who walks away from war leaves it behind. Trigger wiped blood from his lip. Why me? Why does this matter to you? Caleb stepped closer, now only feet away. Operation Serpent's Cradle? Trigger froze. You were supposed to testify. You saw the cargo. You knew what they were moving. Kids, ammunition, bioagents. Caleb's voice never rose. You cut and ran. Men died cleaning that mess up. Good men. Trigger swallowed. I didn't know. You knew. You didn't care. He dropped something at Trigger's feet. A photo. Trigger's eyes widened. 2 names written across the bottom. Caleb, Hunter, C.J. Brian Knox. You remember Brian? Trigger didn't answer. The blood out in my arms while we waited for an evac you knew wouldn't come. Because you sold it out. Took the payout. Ran. I didn't... Caleb raised his hand. I'm not going to kill you, Trigger. That'd be too easy. He turned his eyes to the others. But if any of you ever come back here again, you'll wish I had... Then he stepped back. Duke growled once, then vanished. So did Caleb. Just like that. Gone into the trees. Trigger stood slowly. His hands were shaking. He turned to the others. We leave. Now. Zip didn't argue. Rick didn't ask questions. And no one looked back. They didn't have to. Some ghosts walk beside you long after you've left their woods. The sun rose slowly over the ridge, casting long shadows over the cabin that hadn't slept. Caleb stood on the porch, a tin cup of black coffee in his hand, steam curling like ghost breath into the morning air. His flannel shirt was still damp from the dew of the forest, and there were small nicks on his hands from where the tripwires had been reset, the earth repacked. Duke sat by his feet, perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the edge of the woods, where the night had bled out into the day. Caleb hadn't spoken since the last shot was fired. Not that there'd been many. He didn't need gunfire to win. He just needed memory and preparation. Inside the cabin, a notebook lay open on the kitchen table. Its pages were handwritten, in tight, careful script. Entries going back a decade. Not a journal. A log. times, movements, weather. Unusual behavior in the forest, vehicle sightings, unmarked drones. Once, years ago, he'd recorded a sighting of a satellite feed interruption that lasted only 12 seconds, enough to trigger an entire protocol. The cabin wasn't just his home. It was a record, and now it was part of something much bigger. At exactly 7:30, the phone behind the cupboard wall rang. The line with no listed number. No caller ID. Caleb answered with a single word. Hunter. The voice on the other end was clipped. East Coast, military cadence. We received your package, confirming visuals. Subject ID'd. Secondary confirmed injured. Perimeter has been reset. Copy, Caleb said. There was a pause. You're being offered reactivation. Another pause, a longer one. You're certain? I didn't spend 20 years in the shadows to come back into them. The voice didn't argue. Then we mark this one closed? Caleb looked down at Duke. The dog was staring at the same tree he had all morning. No, Caleb said. Not yet. The line went dead. In a motel 3 counties away, Trigger sat on the edge of a creaking mattress, blood seeping through the gauze wrapped around his ribs. Zip was gone. Took the SUV and disappeared somewhere around dawn. Brick hadn't said a word since they left the ridge. He sat now at the tiny desk, flipping a pocket knife open and shut. Trigger looked at him. You think he's going to come for us? Rick didn't answer. The question didn't need one. They both knew the truth. Whatever Caleb Hunter was now, he wasn't a man anymore. Not in the way the world understood men. He was a ledger. A blade that didn't dull. He wasn't hunting them for revenge. He wasn't even angry. That was the worst part. He was doing it because it needed to be done. Back in town, Sheriff Dean Rourke walked into his office and found the manila envelope waiting on his desk. No postage, no name, just a strip of black electrical tape across the flap. He opened it carefully. Inside were 6 photographs, all printed in black and white. 5 men, 1 woman. All military backgrounds, 2 dishonorable discharges, 1 AWOL. The woman, MIA, presumed dead. All connected to a trafficking ring disbanded over a decade ago during a classified black site mission off the coast of Syria. Threw down a drink of water. Leon swallowed hard. Attached was a single note. Not all ghosts stay buried. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Dean had known Caleb for over 15 years, served with him once before the badge, back when things still made sense. He thought he'd seen Caleb at his most dangerous back then. Thought wrong. He picked up the phone and dialed the number Caleb had given him years ago. The line with no ringback, just silence until pickup. But this time no one answered. Dean didn't try again. Out on the trail just beyond the ridge, Caleb was walking, not pacing, not searching. Just walking. It wasn't a patrol. It was a process. Letting the forest talk again. Letting it breathe. The trees had stories. You just had to stand still long enough to hear them. He passed the site where the directional charge had gone off. Now a small crater, burnt moss curling up at the edges. The smell had faded, but the memory hadn't. He stepped over it, like a memory too heavy to dig up again. Duke padded ahead, tail low but steady. They reached the creek, where the water moved in silence, whispering against the stones, like secrets trying to surface. Caleb crouched and dipped his hands into the current. Real. A reminder. He was still here. Still breathing. But a part of him hadn't come back from the last mission. Maybe it never would. He looked across the water to the clearing beyond. That's where he buried Brian Knox. Not officially. There was no casket, no headstone, just a patch of dirt, a hand-carved stake, and a dog tag nailed into the wood. No one else knew. It wasn't on any map, but it was the reason this place still mattered. He stood there for a while, silent, the breeze moving just enough to make the leaves murmur. "You see that, Brian?" he whispered. "They still think they're the only ones who know how to fight." He reached up and adjusted the tag on the post. "Not today." Back at the cabin, the system chirped. An alert. Not from the perimeter. From the town. One of Caleb's relays was tripped. Camera feed activated. Street-level image. Gas station, blurry but clear enough. Torita, getting into a sedan. New plates. Shaved beard. But still him. Caleb stared at the screen. He didn't reach for a gun. Didn't lace up boots. He just stared. Because something deeper than anger was stirring now. Not vengeance. Responsibility. He'd whined once. Caleb looked down. Then slowly nodded. "We end it," he said. No heat in his voice. Gravity. Because sometimes peace doesn't come when the gun is empty. It comes when the last lesson is finally understood. Caleb didn't hurry. There was no need. Men who chased revenge rarely caught it clean. He moved with that same unshakable rhythm, methodical, disciplined, a man not controlled by fury but directed by purpose. He loaded the truck like he was packing for a weekend away. Rations, water, a spare rifle he wouldn't need, a weatherproof bag of evidence, and Duke, waiting by the passenger side, tail tapping twice against the wheel well, already knowing it was time. He didn't leave through the main trail. He never did. Instead, he took the back path, the one the forestry maps didn't show. It cut low along the valley, past the edge of the old quarry, and emptied out a mile south of the main road near the old service station. Trigger would be gone by now. Caleb had no interest in chasing him again. That chapter had been written. But there were still things that needed to be said, and people who needed to hear them. 3 hours later, he parked outside the sheriff's office. Dean Rourke was standing on the porch, coffee in hand as if he'd been expecting him. "Thought you might come by," Dean said, squinting at the rising sun behind him. "Coffee's hot. I put a fresh pot on." Caleb nodded once. "Brought something for you." They went inside, past the quiet Hume of the copier. The dust-covered wanted posters and the photos of the town's founders hung in crooked frames. Caleb placed the waterproof bag on Dean's desk and unzipped it. Inside, a hard drive, 3 envelopes, and a small thumb-sized camera. "What's this?" Dean asked, though he already knew. "Names, video, documents, contracts, from the old network. Everything they buried. It's all in there." Dean looked up at him. "You sure you want to hand this over? You could burn it, walk away." Caleb shook his head. "Some fires are meant to light the truth, not destroy it." Dean didn't argue. "I'll call in what favors I have left," he said. "Get it to people who'll do more than just sweep it under the rug." "You'll get it where it needs to go," Caleb replied. "You always did." There was a long silence then. 2 old soldiers, one in a badge, one in scars. "Way now?" Dean asked finally. "Because I kept waiting for the war to be over," Caleb said, looking out the window. "But I realized it ends when we say it ends, and not a minute before." Dean reached over and set a hand on the bag, fingers closing around the edges. "You did good, Caleb. Maybe not perfect, but good." Caleb didn't answer. He just nodded and walked back outside, where Duke was still watching the horizon, alert but relaxed. That night, back at the cabin, Caleb stood over the fire pit behind the main structure. He tossed a few logs in, added some pine needles, and struck a match. The flames caught quickly, casting long, flickering shapes across the clearing. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the final item from the old op. Brian Knox's patch. It was frayed at the edges, faded from years of sweat, dirt, and sun. A wolf's head stitched into fabric, teeth bared in a silent snarl, the insignia of a unit that didn't officially exist. Caleb held it for a long moment, then tossed it into the fire. The flames curled around it, consumed it without smoke. The past didn't vanish, but it changed form. The next morning, a knock echoed on the cabin door. Caleb answered it slowly, cautiously. Sadie stood there, his younger sister in jeans and a windbreaker, a concerned look in her eyes and a thermos in her hand. "You missed your check-in," she said. "I know," he said. "I had a few things to take care of." She stepped inside without asking, eyes scanning the room like she always did, but this time not looking for weapons, just signs of wear. Fatigue, the kind of damage that didn't show up on skin. "You look like you've been through something," she said. "I have," he replied, "but it's done now." He sat across from him, poured 2 cups of coffee from the thermos and leaned in, with that sharpness he remembered from when she used to question him like a detective at Sunday dinner. "Ian called me." "I figured. He told me you handed something over, said it might make a difference. That true?" "I don't know," Caleb said, "but I had to try." Sadie smiled faintly. "That's more than most do." They drank in silence. Outside, Duke lay sprawled in a patch of sunlight, belly up, snoring gently. Sadie glanced at him. "He seems happy, feeling invigorated. Higher cock." "He earned it." "Well, did you?" Caleb didn't reply, but he didn't argue either. Later that week, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up the long forest road. Not government, not military, private. A woman stepped out, early 40s, sharp blazer, clean heels that somehow didn't sink into the gravel. She didn't smile, didn't offer a name. She just extended an envelope. "For what you turned in," she said, "and for what you walked away from." He took it, but didn't open it. "Not interested in being recruited," he said flatly. "You won't be," she replied. "People like you aren't recruits. You're reminders that somewhere out here justice still breathes." She nodded once and left the way she came. Caleb stood in the driveway long after the SUV disappeared. He didn't open the envelope. He buried it under the porch where the old generator used to be, not because he didn't need the money, because some things didn't need to be spent, just stored, like trust. By the end of the month, the forest returned to normal. No more strange movements. No tripwire resets. No gang members slinking through the brush. Trigger disappeared off every radar. Zip, too. The others either left town or fell back into whatever hole they'd come from. Caleb didn't pursue them, because that's not what this had been about, and hadn't been a kill mission. It had been a lesson. A reminder. You don't get to break into a quiet man's world and expect him to remain quiet. He'd warned them. He'd let them walk. That was mercy, and mercy is louder than any bullet. In the final days of the season, before the snow returned, Caleb took Duke down to the river one last time before winter. They walked the same path they always did, past the old outpost logs, over the moss-covered stones, and down to the water's edge. He skipped a rock across the surface. Duke barked once, chasing the ripples. The sound echoed clear and sharp through the trees. It didn't sound like war. It sounded like home. And for the first time in years, Caleb Hunter let himself smile. Not because the world had changed, but because he had. And that at last was enough.